More to Marketing. Welcome to More to Marketing, the podcast that explores marketing, product, and everything business. I'm your host today, and we're going to be talking about behavioural science and what businesses can do to nudge customers. I'm very fortunate today to have Sonia, and Sonia is an expert in this field. How can I say this? Well, Sonia is a leader in the application of behavioural economics and behavioural science in business. She has applied behavioural science to shatter entrenched paradigms and give her clients an edge, a real edge, saving clients millions of dollars. She's worked with CEOs, founders, executives, their teams, Fortune 500 companies, all the way through to startups. So she really does know every end of the spectrum here. She works with innovators and businesses that are in crisis. And just because she isn't busy enough, that does take quite a lot of time as well. She's also a member of diversifyglobal.com.au and the Faculty of Australian arm of KPMG Upside Founders Programme. Welcome, Sonia.
Thanks, Susan. Great to be here.
It is so fabulous to meet you and talk to you more in depth today. I have loved learning about nudge and listening and reading to other things that you've done in the past. But tell me about you, how you got here, and a bit about your journey.
Oh, sure, Susan. So my background is actually in marketing and as a strategist. And I worked for around 20 years actually in the pharmaceutical industry, building markets and brands, and worked both client side and agency side. I was the general manager of an ad agency in Sydney for a while. And then actually I got quite bored actually with business. I opened up my own consultancy, which was great. And I was able to work with clients that I enjoyed working with. And in that time though, I had a bit of an aha moment and moved to Byron Bay. And I actually dropped out of the workforce for about 8 years, to be honest. And then went, I have to make money again. So I was looking at what was different, what was dynamic, what was happening, and synchronistically came across somebody who was working in the space of behavioural science, or at the time it was called behavioural economics, and neuroscience. And it was the latest coming out from the UK. And he ran a market research company in Sydney, and he wanted to speak to me about the pharmaceutical industry and contacts in that space. And he set up really a think tank with 4 of us, and we pulled together all the literature in behavioural science. And after about 3 months of being in the living room, building a model for business, we went, well, it's time to take this to market. And we ended up with around 50 heuristics and biases that we know of today, and built a model for that and took it to industry. And we were very fortunate that our first brand ended up being the biggest brand of the pharmaceutical industry. We ran a project for them and it blew their minds and it blew our minds. And that was sort of, as they say, the rest is history. So for, 12 years now, I've been working in this space of behavioural economics / behavioural science. And then fortunately have been applying it in both the startup world and doing quite a lot of speaking events. And so people in that smaller startup world, as you know, I'm sure they're dynamic, they pivot, they try things today. So you get all these amazing case studies from them. And that really then gave me the confidence to take that to big business, which is a little bit slower in terms of their dynamic of how they work, and still very savvy, as we know, which is why they're so successful. So I ended up by natural market selection rather than intent of having startups and Fortune 500 companies as clients. And it was really, really cool. So I feel like I've had fun in business for the last 12 years.
You've definitely been very lucky and been able to stay close to the beach as well, which I know is something that you enjoy, getting away from the rat race. And I'm very envious of you too, because to be able to discover something new, to conceptualize it, but then to apply it, that's a dream come true for a lot of people to be able to do that. So that's so amazing.
Thank you. I mean, it's not without a lot of hard work. And having said that, but in a different way though, Susan, because when I moved up here, it was actually for a life decision. Otherwise I'd probably be living in New York. I would be still part of the rat race in that space. And I loved what I did. It's just that I decided to jump off the journey in that way. And now I believe I bring a fuller version of myself, though, to every client, dynamic. And I love working for myself because it means I can I can change the model as is required for every client rather than having to force fit them into a model that a business says is the right way to go. And for me, I appreciate for a lot of businesses that is their model. Yet for me, I don't find I gel with it so much. So I've been able to do that and have this balance of life and work for sure.
I love that. And I think for our audience, a lot of people won't understand why it's so important to be talking about behavioral science and how it differs from traditional psychology. Are you able to touch a bit on that and how relevant it is?
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, that's a good question, actually, because obviously it entails like elements of psychology and anthropology and neuroscience, behavioral economics. There's a whole body of work now that falls under this umbrella of behavioral science. And so really what we're looking at is how people make risks, take risks, make decisions and choices. And the difference that has actually been added into this equation, Susan, is how we spend money. And so psychology doesn't really look at how we spend money in that same degree. And Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in this space many years ago, I'm sure some of your listeners have read Thinking Fast and Slow. The connection was made in that space, and that's really why I think there's been this explosion. And then the nudge unit was set up in 2010 by the UK government. So that's really where we saw the power of it. And they had a charter originally that if the nudge unit didn't make the department 5 times the revenue of the cost of the business of the team, and there were 8 people on the team, within 2 years, it would be disbanded. And the public sector for years has been trying to change behaviour with policy. And, we're talking billions and billions of dollars. And at best, you might get a 15 or 10, 15% behaviour change. So that was the charter of this nudge unit. And 2 years later, they saved them 22 times the cost of the team.
Wow.
And so I say to everyone that I speak with, if you could bring a return that is 22 times the cost of your team, would you give it a go? And obviously, it's a bit of a no-brainer. And the other upside of it was the power of measurement. And so instead of jumping all in, as we often did with, say, research or marketing programs and marketing planning, you plan for the year, your budgets, is already allocated for the year in advance. Here we're saying, well, let's pilot live in market, not hypothetically with a focus group. Let's pilot different nudges and different interventions live in market, get proof points of success or failure, which we call unintended consequences. And then from that, work out, well, which one gives you the best success, and then invest your money. And so for me, that was the game changer, was the power of data and measurement in actually proving the recommendations of behavioural science, because then it's no longer Sonia says or your boss says or management says. It's actually we've proven it and this says.
Exactly. And that data point is so integral for a lot of those decisions, particularly when those pivots are happening, when you recognize other behaviors that are coming out of it they didn't expect, which is why it wasn't what you originally designed.
Well, and I think that's you're on point, that what's really happened for me is that I've also got enough flexibility that usually when I meet a client, I now say, once we get in the data, we'll actually see if there's a bigger opportunity or a bigger challenge that you might need to, a red flag that you might need to fix. And I actually find now that I'll get a brief, and where we start is about 30% of what the brief was. And it's not about getting another 70% of revenue from a client. It's actually about where are they going to get the fastest quick wins. And the data usually points you in that direction. Or the data can actually show that the belief systems around what the problem was were actually incorrect. So I call that busting the myths of business with data.
Definitely. And that's why it's so important to do those hypotheses as well, to bust them or to show they're true, because that's how you can actually grow as a business as well, as by testing and changing and going against part of the status quo. Because if you stay still, your competitors will just outrun you, and they'll be way ahead of you. So this is a way that you can iterate.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, a lot of people we find have a lot of data, or they're scared of data. So our job, I have data scientists and statisticians as part of my team. And but our job, though, is to really hold a hand of a client and get them to see that the data is actually their best friend. And we have seen massive shift with people when we can actually do that. And they realize they then solve the right problem and become the hero. It's not about us being the hero. It's about empowering people to actually look at that. And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of e-commerce and a lot of platforms today, what we see is everyone's got dashboards galore. And I now call that death by dashboard, because people are handing their power over to the dashboard and go, yeah, we've got it all in there. And my question is, well, what different decision did you make today? What different decision did you make last week? And if you haven't made one, you're probably not looking at your data, or it's not giving you enough of what you need.
And I also pressure my team with dashboards or with any type of metrics that they're doing regularly. I that's lovely. I love seeing data. I'm a huge person that loves it, but I want to know the insight. I want to know, what is it telling me? Is there an anomaly here? Is it BAU type of activity based on last year? Is there a change happening here? I want to know the pieces behind it. The number's great, but I want to have detail.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, if you look at the value chain of data, information on its own is meaningless. And so you take information and data and then you turn it into insight, and then you need to give it value, which is what you're alluding to. And a lot of people don't do that, but they stay in this mouse wheel of report writing. And so then you go, well, if we actually can get the right information as the baseline, then we can solve the problem. And that's where, we actually then apply behavioural science, is looking at, what is the default behaviour based on that, and how are we going to actually measure the success of an intervention.
And I think that's key. And one of the things I really wanted to understand from you also is, how can a business leverage behavioral science to enhance their customer experience, or even just improve that performance? I know you've spoken about nudges, so I'd love to know more about that and about these measurements that you're talking about too.
Sure. So we work in the space of understanding the human brain and bringing, I really say today, understanding the brain is your business. And that we apply heuristics and biases. So heuristics are the shortcuts that your brain takes that lead to these biased decision-making. And often, if you repeat a behavior over and over again and it's actually biased, then it becomes a habit. And then you keep repeating it, it becomes your belief set, whether you actually originally believed it or not. Yet we also find that people drop out of things, very quickly. So engagement and disengagement is what you're actually interested in, based on system 1 and system 2 of the brain. And if you're actually designing things too much for too much engagement for my brain, you lose me. And so we want to understand, the friction points, or where people are actually disengaged. And we do quite a lot of audits in that space, both online and online. But let's take the online space, for instance. Let's say we've got, 500 heuristics and biases. Today, what happens, and we're all used to seeing, the Trustpilot and 5 stars and, some social proof that is there that's hard-coded into a system. However, Susan, if you go online today, depending on your environmental factors and how you're feeling or how the kids are or whatever else, your actual journey on that space can be different tomorrow, depending on, again, those exact same factors. And so when you hard code in some of these, triggers or interventions, which we all know, exist, you get, 10% off if you become a subscriber, those types of things.
Yep.
They've become a norm. Yeah, we go, well, you need to be a lot more dynamic. You need to understand and personalize the journey for someone and actually see which nudges work for them versus someone else. So somebody might get moved by loss aversion more than they will by social proof, or, anything, cognitive dissonance, or, just color, or any, a picture. So, and we've learned a lot about that in terms of understanding psychological profiling, using the Ocean model, which is very well known in psychology, that, an extrovert will be turned on by something very different to someone who's classed as agreeable or neurotic. So you start actually understanding the journey of how you can personalize. And we work, I have a team of behavioral scientists and data scientists where we can actually look at that journey for a brand for customers and actually look at the best way to communicate their segments. and then also identify whether or not there's even segments in the market that could be more lucrative for you, and what their value is.
And I think that's key, is from what I just took out from what you just said, not everyone is the same every day when they go back.
That's it. And I think that, that we're hard placed. We think, here's our program, and A/B split test a lot of things, and we go, but we're still doing it for, even if there's multiple segments, there's still hard-coded segments. And so there's certain parts of the journey where that's difficult to change. Yet certainly online, we're partners with Behavioural, who are leaders in behavioural science and AI for e-commerce, and they're based out of Switzerland. They have, the likes of Esprit, Nespresso, Volvo as clients. And we've recently got on board Brooke Eichhorn, who's ex-head of fashion and ex-head of marketplace of eBay in Australia, which is a big win for us to growing that in the Southern Hemisphere, that business. But the whole point of that is that we've got these hundreds of heuristics and biases, and you don't just run a split test for 6 weeks and then go, which one worked and let's hard code that in. We run it forever. And you have a control group working with you and your nudge group. And then we can actually see the performance by nudge and what dynamic, because we've even found that an image on one page on a website, the same image with exactly the same information on a different page, can actually be positive in one instance and negative in another. And you go, well, how would you learn that? How would you find that out? And so these nudges are dynamic, and they pop up, and they could be a variety of things. Even how you sort the carousel or how you sort the cart can anchor and set order effects, which change behavior. And the whole intent is, you have people coming to your site and you've spent a huge amount of money in this top end of the funnel getting them there. And we know without fail that there's a lot of businesses losing money that's sitting there quite easily for them to convert.
And it's the real power of these nudges. When I came across this concept very recently, because I knew of it in something very different in the past, I was just like, wow, the power of this is amazing, that you can control. And as you've said, you don't just do it as a once off. You continually do it to continually learn, to continually keep improving, so you get those results every time, because you can't set and forget it, which I think that's what a lot of people do when it comes to those ABC tests, whatever they do. They think that solves it, and then they don't revisit it for a year or 2 years when their sales drop. And they don't realize the importance of continual changing, because audience change a little bit, their behaviors change a bit, economics might even come into it, where it's going into financial year time. All these different aspects can change what the behavior is. So the nudges need to also change slightly to be able to adjust for the environment too.
Oh, absolutely. Even the weather changes how people spend money online, and we do know these environmental factors exist. So you go, what's within your control and what is, outside of your control. And with Behavioural, for instance, they initially set up to reduce the return rate, because particularly in Europe, people buy multiple sizes and 45% of the products get sent back. And from a sustainability issue, that's, the cost of that to the environment is just extraordinary. So that's actually was the pivotal, aha moment was, if Thilo and Valen, who are the founders, could crack that, it was like, wow, we've solved this major problem. And so they found that they can reduce return rates by about 5% for businesses. And, Esprit is a large client of theirs. So you can imagine the benefit of just that one nudge, or one aspect of it. They might have, 30 variants of different types of nudges to actually solve that one issue. And again, depending on the behavior, they can predict, well, who is likely to return these? You can actually predict who's going to come back to a site without offering them something versus who doesn't. So we have intelligent couponing, because everybody's spending so much money or giving so much away. We go, well, you don't actually have to give a coupon to everybody. We can understand the behavior and dynamic of who is going to come versus not by, AI understanding the behaviors of your customer base on your site. So, Nespresso versus Esprit are very different. They're different categories. Behaviors are different. And you want to make sure you're building for that. So for us, to me, it was a bit of a no-brainer. I had never seen anything this powerful. even though we're doing, nudges, say, even front end of understanding dynamic of human behavior, applying them to the advertising that we do, applying them to all the, say, the EDMs and everything, applying them to the segmentation so you've actually got the right segment. For me, this was the full stop, or, the icing of the cake of this gold layer that is just sitting there disappearing. And it's a pay on performance model. So that got me over the line of going, well, if you're guaranteeing you're going to get me an uplift or I don't have to pay, there's no risk here. There's no risk for me. And, we're getting up to 15, and for some clients, 20% increase in net revenue with nudges on their website. So that's powerful money in a tight a tight retail market.
And it's significant too, even that wastage removal.
Yeah.
And something even as simple, and people don't understand that a pop-up message giving a coupon, that will resonate for some people, but not everyone. For others, particularly those ones that don't care what price they're paying, that could actually be a turn-off factor and they leave because of it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's where this is so clever, when you're able to actually have more predictive modeling in past behavior, because they're a repeat person, don't have to have the pop-up. Therefore, they're not going to have that added step in their journey.
Yeah, for sure. And the whole, the whole intent is, I don't understand the technology. My goal was always, I was getting so confused by AI. You try and keep up with it, and every week on LinkedIn, there's like, here's another 100 things I should be doing with AI. So I went, well, actually, I'm just going to leave all that behind and do what I'm good at, and find the people who are very clever at doing this. And so this team have been doing it since 2019. So it's not like they've been playing with AI as the hot button for the last 6 months. It's actually an embedded and successfully proven program and proven intervention. The other side of it too, Susan, to keep in mind is that because so much is done digitally, you need this whole IT team that are actually supporting what you're doing. Yes. And how do you bridge all of that? And clever thinking on their part is, let's automate it so that you don't have to do the work, and has this light touch in terms of people requirements. So it's just one line of code, and then we do all the work for you. And people go, can it really be that? Is it really that? Don't we need a team that are going to have to actually be monitoring this? And we say, no, that's our job. And the other side of it, which I find really quite extraordinary, is that in most customer support, we're used to having a customer success person, or somebody, a key account manager. And for Behamix, their customer success is actually a behavioural scientist. And
Love
so
it.
again, it's like, well, that's our job, is to actually keep coming up with new nudges, new interventions, what's working on your site. The system learns what's working best and not, and where to turn it on and off. And then over time, there's more AI models that can get programmed in once the data's there, which, if you're large like Esprit, or they, have Douglas as one of their clients in Germany, which is like a big marketplace, we're talking hours, and within hours, you already know what's working and not working.
Exactly. And I suppose that also comes down to the amount of data points can help you be more successful, to understand areas of improvement. So smaller companies like the startups must have been very difficult for you, because you had no benchmark to go against. You had no data coming in. So you had to go out and go, you know what, let's just drop it and see what the behavior is, and then iterate.
Well, yes, unless you're an e-commerce site, so the runway for those smaller clients. So we have got some smaller scale-ups that are on the platform where we'd say their revenue is about, say, $3 million a year. And, which is so different to the other end of the scale. What it is, though, is that, yes, you need the data. The runway takes longer. So where, you're talking hours, for a marketplace, we're talking a couple of weeks here now for the data points for them to flow. And you do find there's a bit more volatility, and it's actually based on volume. However, it's the same intent that no matter who you are, we found that the model requires really a minimum of 150,000 visitors to a site per month. And it doesn't matter then the revenue model, because we're looking at behavior, and nothing also is behind the paywall. So we don't dovetail into, let's say, segmentation and personalisation, that a business may have their segments and they know who fits in each one. Ours is actually, so you can't then go, well, these are the nudges right for that person. Sonia should get nudged in this way and Susan should get nudged in this way. And it has been a deliberate choice not to go behind that paywall, because it gives us more opportunity to actually do what we need to do with true behavior.
I'd also say it probably keeps you unbiased as well.
Well, yeah.
Because you're not knowing the behavior. It really is truly you're trying to find out and discover it. So therefore, it's actually going to be more applicable then for the business, and it could actually challenge what they've put in there too.
For sure. We've had clients, where different nudges work on different devices. So we can see obviously what works on a desktop versus a tablet versus, a phone. And you can see which ones have more impact there. You can actually then obviously make adjustments for each of those based on your customer base. And then, yeah, absolutely. It's like we don't know who you are as a being. We just know these behavior points. And so we can predict based on your behavior what you're likely to do, because we're actually comparing you with someone like you and running a control the whole time.
Yeah. Do you think that, I know you've mentioned AI and how it's been changing some of the different ways that we look at data. Is there any other trends that you've seen or any other innovations, particularly in behavioral science and nudges, that really excites you that you can talk to?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I always keep people on the radar. I go, well, what are they doing there? What are they doing here? So the way I've set up my business, having previously run an advertising agency and obviously worked in big companies before, and then moving to Byron, I decided I didn't want to have people management. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to have a group of consultants that I can tap into globally, who are really the best in the world. And so what I keep, looking out for is who can I add into the offer for my clients, because everyone's the same. Not everybody needs the same thing. And so I do like, there's a company called EasyBots. They're a New Zealand-based company. And they do a lot with your chat, the chat bot. Yep. And so to monetize it and then personalize it. So we're having conversations now on how we can partner, that we can actually add behavioral science into the dynamic of what's going on there beyond what they're doing. And, they have like the All Blacks are one of their clients. And so that's a smaller business, but they've got significant client base and they're getting very good traction. So we've partnered up with them. We've got some other partners in London that we work for, just to understand the human brain. So some of it in the research space for implicit response testing, which is quite different. That's say for pack design or campaign design, where we're looking at how do we actually understand what goes on pre-thought, and we can actually understand then true human behavior, because we have all learned that what we say we do and what we do are two different things. And
very much.
And in research, I think we can say that as, we know that as a given now. We used to spend, when I look back in the pharmaceutical days, we'd spend so much money in our research budget. Even if budgets got cut, that bit never did. Whereas today, I wouldn't really trust those focus groups and those intention to, to treat and intention to switch research, because we go, well, forget intention, let's actually see it live in market. And I think even in behavioural science, that's where some of the disconnect is, from academic study. We need to bridge academic study to real world. And so you go, well, does it replicate? And does it replicate every time, or in what scenario? And even if we just for a moment go back, Susan, to Bahamics, they're finding too that some nudges work in some categories versus other categories. And then we've got contextual differences across countries. So Esprit, for instance, was in 15 countries. And then you go, well, do the same nudges work in the same country? And they don't. So if we do that one size fits all model, which it's a bit like we've gone to, we're doing a bit of a full circle from, global campaigns and global interventions for brands to now going, well, what happens in France isn't the same as what happens in the US versus Switzerland versus Australia.
So going back to your picture example too, that picture that they have in that global campaign alone may be fine in one area, but not in another.
Well, and then you go, well, let's have a look at personality traits and the different segmentations. Let's say you've got 5 different segments. You can actually then test based on psychology, what is the right picture, color, language, nudge, even what's the right nudge for them. And so we combine all that together to actually get a true understanding and build those profiles for clients, so they actually understand, well, how should I be speaking to this audience really, rather than having one picture that, as we know, is not optimizing the spend that's going to support it.
Exactly. And it really is making sure that, say, a marketer only has so much budget. The last thing you want is for the finance to come in and say, you haven't spent it wisely, you haven't had what I deem as a good return on investment, therefore I'm cutting it. You want to be able to say that you've optimized and done everything you possibly could to be able to get the results. And that doesn't necessarily work if you're going to have that, let's just spray everyone with the same paint gun approach.
Well, for sure. And I actually think for the clever people out there in your audience, behavioural science can be the edge for any person in an organization to actually make them shine and excel, because you have true measured outcomes. So if you're not even sure what it is or where to start, you go, well, let's just start thinking, how did I measure my performance? And so if you imagine that you were able to go to your next performance review and go, this last, quarter by quarter, this is actually what I have been able to prove. This has actually cost this much to roll out, and this is the return. And then we tried these 6 nudges, 2 backfired, 3 worked, and here was the winning one. And that actually cost this, but it didn't cost as much as we were about to spend on this campaign. And then, you actually go with these measured outcomes and you say, here's what I've returned for you. Now, somebody else walks in without that and you go, well, who are you going to promote and who are you going to give a salary increase? So I think that power lies there. And a classic example we had, if I go straight back to the beginning, which was this pharmaceutical client, is that they were about to spend $2 to $3 million on a direct-to-consumer campaign to try and keep them on therapy. Now, when I was building brands, I would have, my marketing plan had those campaigns in them. When I was running an ad agency, we were selling those campaigns and creative ideas to clients. And we did a friction audit, a 360-degree audit. And today we'd call it a friction audit. And what happened was we actually found that in one small area, because of the system of this authorized script that was required for a patient, if they missed an appointment, it meant they dropped out of getting the authority script from the government. Now, all of us know how difficult it is to get into a specialist for a next appointment. And so it took another 3 months. And so they would just drop out of the system and couldn't drop back in. And so no amount of money would change that behavioural dynamic. And so that they actually cancelled that DTC campaign the next day. So that saved that company like $2 to $3 million, like in a day, so to speak. So I think that project maybe was worth, I don't know, $50,000 to $80,000 back then. And that's a pretty good return on investment for anyone in marketing, where you've gone, actually, we've been able to prove the problem. Now let's solve the right problem. So rather than using that AIDA model, awareness, interest, desire, action, which is the traditional marketing model, I used it for decades. Many people still do. And that's the model that's been here since the first advertising agency was created in Philadelphia back in 1898. And here we are still using that model. Yeah, if we say we can leapfrog the model and we go, you ask yourself 3 new questions in business. What is the behavior you want to change? Which can be really hard. So awareness is not a behavior. So we have to get our thinking away from how do I get more people to know about me to what is the actual true behavior. The second question is, what is the default behavior? So if the customers or employees aren't doing what you want them to do, then the default is away from the desired behavior. If you're not number 1 in category, the default is actually not for your brand. And so then the third question is, how do you disrupt the default? And if you can apply behavioural science, it doesn't matter how big you are or how big your budgets are. Today, the smartest person wins. And I love it because smaller players can play in a big market. Whereas before it used to, we're talking, say, a decade, 2 decades ago, it really was whoever had the biggest budget won. Let's just throw everything at it across our marketing budget, our sales teams, and hope it works. And now you go, actually, you can be smarter than your bigger competitor And if you understand the dynamic of human behavior and you can prove it, what you're doing, you save money, you make money, and, it's a huge win for your business. And you suddenly realize actually there's a different way to actually be in business.
I think that's so true and so powerful as well. And all these new channels that are popping up all the time are giving that opportunity. So, and some of these bigger companies are slower. So that gives the opportunity for the smaller ones to be able to jump on and test and try and get out there and then improve themselves with nudges along the way.
Absolutely. And I think, we also we are herd creatures. So we're all thinking, what's the latest thing I need to be a part of? And unfortunately, a lot of that becomes distraction. So part of it also is, how do you work out what's real and what isn't? And how do you work out, what you can and can't do? So I think for me, one of the wins with Bahamics in particular, if I go back to that, is that to be able to go with a pay on performance model where the tech is built, where you go, some of those players don't have the big budgets and people are scared of risk, or you're scared of, well, how much money are you going to make me? How much will it cost me? Well, if you're making a lot of money and you just pay a percentage of the uplift, it doesn't matter, because so long as you're profitable to begin with, then you're still making more and more money. But I think that's what's being demanded of people more and more is, well, prove it.
Yeah.
Prove what you
100%.
prove what you want me to do. And so for me, I always go, if I've got a client meeting, I've walked in there and gone, if I had this amount of money, would I spend it on Sonia or on her team or on Bahamics or on behavioural science or someone else? And not always, the answer isn't always me. The answer is, how would I spend it really if I was in their shoes? And that to me is your job. If you're supporting a client, then you also don't get caught, because you're only going where you're meant to go.
Exactly. I think there are a whole pile of challenges that come about as well, particularly when you're looking at applying behavioral science. Are there any other challenges that you've seen that are going to start emerging from all the different discussions you've been having, all the papers you've been reading?
Oh, I think there's lots. There's so much. And I guess that's the question within behavioral science is, what's the next decade going to look like, And we've seen so many things, and I've quite liked that I deliberately sit on sort of like the sidelines of it, and I don't get too caught up in the associations of behavioral science. Like any group, they have their own life cycle of what they do. And so I tend to have this hybrid model of business and behavioral science. However, I think, in this space, it's like the biggest challenge has been, how do you actually embed it within an organization? Because it's difficult to actually work out how to do that. And so different businesses are trying different models. Do you set up a behavioral science department? Do you work with external consultants? Do you have it from the top down? Which one works and which one's best? And, there's no winning model yet. It's like, which ones do work? And so there's big success and some failures in that space.
I know I said challenges, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing either, because you get learnings from that. So then you can see what is working in one area, what isn't working in another, and then apply it differently and apply new technologies differently as well to be able to improve. Because I look back a couple of decades and go, wow, the amount of data we now have at our fingertips and the response rate that we can get even to a global level is phenomenal. And that's just been a couple of decades that this has changed in. So imagine the next couple of decades, what that is going to look like as well.
Well, and I think that's where it becomes, where do you put your focus? Because everybody's got to watch out they don't burn out. And this is real. We're seeing so much happen in the work environment, where it's like, well, what is your job description and how is it changing and how do you keep up with it? And will I still have a job? Will AI take over my job? It's like all this stuff is going round and round. And for some of us, it's like it will, and for some of us, it won't. However, I remember as a marketer thinking, when I first read about behavioral science, I thought agencies will be dead, design studios will be dead. I need to reinvent myself as a strategist. And so I added this into the kit. Now, those industries, like as hard as this, the industries are like the dinosaurs of business. They're very difficult to change. However, we've seen massive inroads in this space. And I also know, hand on heart, I find it more ethical. So, the challenges for every person, I think, is to listen to their inner media and really know what's happening. And I think the biggest thing for me is to ask, when somebody says, well, we have to go this way, you go, well, how do you know?
It's asking those whys, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And allowing and creating room for positive dissent has been, the challenge of management for years. And for employees, it's like, they go, well, we've given all this information before and we've told them what doesn't work and what doesn't work and what doesn't work. If you start changing culture, when you change culture, you start empowering people. And so in behavioural science, we use friction audits, which allow a constructive way for dissent. And you try and create friction-free cultures. And there's a lot of businesses who are doing that. And, from the likes of Google all the way down, and Uber was created from that. But then it's like, that might be the reason for the creation of a business. Now you have to go, well, how do we actually embed it in our own? And then you go, well, what else can we do? What other things can we do with our culture? And I think the more you actually bring people up in terms of their knowledge levels and empower them rather than disempower them, the more you get out of everyone. And I've certainly learned that with the data space, if you open this space up to everyone and say, look, we're going to be looking into it and we'll start getting some measurement, the first thing I see is huge fear. And so you need to hold everyone's hands. Like, am I going to be discovered? I haven't been doing a good job, or maybe I didn't set this up right. What have I tried to get away with? So they're all truths that happen within an organization. But the aim isn't to use it for that. The aim is actually to do it the other way and to go, whatever you're worried about, this is how we're going to apply it, and we're going to teach you how to apply it. Now, to have sales teams sit there and say, I just busted my own myth of how I thought something was converting is huge. And when you actually have them then using it in that way and going from fear to pilot, test themselves, start questioning what they do, trying something else, and we're holding their hands in applying behavioural science, even in the conversations, say with a client, and we do that often with a sales team. Now they suddenly go, oh my God, I can play around. Like, it's not set in cement.
It's a superpower. Not only
it is your superpower. And so, I've seen people who were scared, thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm going to get found out, to suddenly becoming heroes, to suddenly running departments because they do actually shine. And often the data, I say this really respectfully, the data nerds who have been sitting in a corner, or it's been relegated to the analysts, there's usually someone who's going, I've seen this stuff for years. And you just ask them, what do you see we're not doing? And let them tell you. And they already know. And then you get the data to actually, to show that. And so they then actually have their foothold in an organization. And I go, instead of, HR has always been close to, or people and culture, to CEOs. I go, data and statisticians for me is where it's at, because the empowerment, the true empowerment of that for a human, not, a lot of motivational sides of things in organizations are intangibles. Yeah, when you can tangibly see the shift in that and the change, and they get results, and people see themselves now in a different way and what they can measure, it's life-changing for people.
And it can also mean that they're feeling more empowered within the organization themselves and want to give more. I know with my own team's president in the past, by giving them the empowerment to be able to come up with ideas and suggestions that are out of the box. Maybe they've been said in the past, but it hasn't been the right time, but to bring them forward again and feel comfortable to, really makes that team and that culture more accessible for everybody, and that they feel like they're making a contribution in the way that they're wanting to do as well.
For sure. And I think so there's that side of it. And the other side, the flip side of it, Susan, is understanding the brain enough to understand how to receive what your team does. So we know about what we call the endowment effect or ownership effect. So if I'm an employee and I've come up with something, so my boss has asked me to do something and I've gone away and I feel like I've created the solution on my own, when I come back to share it with my manager or the team, I overvalue that 4 times more than anyone else. Now, when you really understand that as the person creating it, so I love my presentations 4 times more than anyone else. I know that before I walk in a room. So I actually have to perform 4 times better for them to even ask for us to be on baseline. And the other flip side is if you're a manager and somebody receives that and you just go, I'll read that later, the deflation that occurs because you don't really understand, they've come to me with that and they're overvaluing that 4 times more than what I place it on. Yes, I want to read it, but I just don't have time. That whole dynamic in that conversation shifts. Now, if an employee comes to you and they've done something with it, some initiative that you didn't ask for, it escalates even more and they overvalue it 8 times more. And so suddenly, it only takes 1 or 2 of those and you deflate a human and they go, well, I'm not going to bother. So not only is, sure, we've been speaking about nudges for, online on retail environments and that end of the sale end. When you look at the human end internally in an organization and go, how do we apply this for better outcomes all round? And you actually break down the barriers of just, we're not communicating because we don't understand the human brain. Then you start having different conversations and you empower and you actually change the culture again, because now everybody's starting to speak because they understand how the human brain works. They know, how our brain overloads if you give me too much choice. But if you don't give me enough choice, it's as simple as I always say, our brain is hardwired to compare. So if you say to somebody, do you want to have a meeting at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, everybody cringes. But if you say, would you like to have one at 9 a.m. or 9:30, suddenly you've got engagement. So just by understanding the human brain and giving me 2 choices, I feel different, and this is like 101 should be taught in school or for every parent, if you want your kids to do something, well, you make your bed or put out the garbage. I might not be happy with either, but the way I respond is different. And then we also know if you give me too many choices, my brain overloads and I disengage completely. So even on these simple, very simple, everyday emails that we send to each other, we can start changing how we communicate, not because we don't know how to speak. It's just we don't know how to engage the brain. And then we have problems with employees and we wonder, why did that happen? You go, well, you sent an email that overloaded me, so I didn't read it.
Yep. It's so true. And I'm sure everyone listening has got many examples they can already think of that they've either experienced themselves or they've seen colleagues go through as well.
Yeah, I'm sure we have got, our own list of them. And so the question becomes, how do you become an observer of yourself? How do you start to see when you disengage and engage and understand why? And also then looking, where's the friction points? Where are the friction points? And, majority of them happen in milliseconds of time and we're unconscious to them. So you need to actually start understanding your unconscious and flip that light switch and make it conscious.
And I think that's really powerful because so much of what we do is just in tuned in us. We turn the TV, we go to a certain channel, we go to the shops, we go to certain aisles, we just grab certain things off the shelf. We're not even thinking, we're just grabbing as we're going. But if you actually potentially stopped and were present in the moment, your decision may be different.
Yeah, your decision may be different. And you also understand that the brain is hardwired to take the path of least effort. And so if our brain is hardwired to conserve energy, and you've got these systems of the brain, system 1 and system 2, who are working together to conserve energy all the time, they're working to say, yeah, take the path of least effort, take the path of least effort, take the path of least effort. And so even internally, if you introduce a new process and you go, I've already told the team 5 times about the new process and they're not using it, it's because their brain is hardwired to take the path of least effort. And so again, by understanding system 1 and system 2 of the brain, system 1 just quickly is fast, automatic, unconscious, and you can't turn it off, but 95% of our decision-making comes from there. And system 2 is slow, deliberate, and effortful. If you're creating system 2 information, but my brain works at system 1, then you just disengage automatically. So these two are working in harmony. And then I'll just share like one of the biggest understandings in behavioural science is the power of loss aversion. And so loss aversion sits under so many areas for me. It's like a game changer of a light bulb of my life, is that we fear loss more than we value gain by a ratio of approximately 2-1. So even if I know something's better for me, to leave my status quo, the fear or the unhappiness of that is twice the happiness of it actually being good for me. And so psychologically, when you really understand this dynamic, if you really are asking, anytime you're asking your staff to do something or you're watching for a customer, you go, well, what is the loss that they're experiencing? And then you go, well, now we can actually understand their behavioural dynamic because they're scared of losing X. And we go, it's as simple as, let's say tonight you were going to go out for dinner with your partner, and then they come home and they go, I'm sorry, I've got a headache. Do you mind if we go out tomorrow night? Well, you love your partner and you don't want them to feel unwell, but the loss you feel because you're thinking, oh, I was going to go to that restaurant and I'd already worked out what I would order for dinner. Now the excitement of that is one level, but the unhappiness of not going now is twice the level of happiness I was expecting. It's disproportionate to the experience. Now, if you realize we do that with everything when we're losing something, and you start becoming conscious of all these little moments where loss aversion is in play and you make that conscious, you'll see this play out so many times in your day, it'll be a shock. And then you go, okay, my reaction is disproportionate to the dynamic in play. And then you think that's why, kid has a tantrum when you take a toy away from them. They've been playing with it and then suddenly they explode because for them, they're losing twice the happiness that they, it's twice the loss of their happiness. So loss aversion kicks in around everything to do with money then as well, And so when you really understand that, even the nudges you put in front of people are understanding the dynamic of loss aversion and how do you actually nudge understanding this true human behavior.
As if you're trying to be a competitor and move people's behavior as well, you need to understand this loss aversion, but also the value you need to place on it to try and get them to convert, or you're never going to get them to convert unless you understand what the value is of this loss.
Yeah, and one of the fastest ways to actually disrupt this fear of loss is to create a new fear of loss. And so you let's say you go, oh, Sonia, well, what's an example? Okay, let's use I'll lose my relationship with my partner if I still want to go out to dinner. I'm exaggerating here, but let's just keep that other thread of going out for dinner. And let's just say that, I then go, I'm going to go out for dinner with my mates and leave my partner behind who's got a headache. Now, if there's a different dynamic in play and they think, actually, I need some support and I'm going to lose the relationship with them, then you go, well, what's more important? Which relationship is actually more important to me,
Yep.
And so we need to come up with this understanding of different fears of loss. And they're not always financial. The financial ones are easy to actually share. But the others, they happen every day, every minute of every day.
Definitely when they're emotive.
Yeah.
Now, if you were going to give one piece of advice to someone looking to apply behavioral science and potentially nudges in their work, what would be that first key piece of advice?
I would say two. Can I say that
in the
sentence? In the sentence, I would say two things. I would say, start looking at your data to see what you think is happening and start understanding what your data is saying are the problems you want to solve. And the second I would say is start reading books by Dan Ariely, who was instrumental in actually bridging academic work and making it possible for the layperson to digest in an easy way. And any book by Dan, his first well-known book is called Predictably Irrational. And so I would start there and I would read, you can read them in a night or two. They're fun reads, they're powerful reads. However, you start with anything too heavy, like don't start with Daniel Kahneman. It's like reading a thesis and you won't ever read anything in behavioral science again. And if you're not sure where to start, give me a call.
I love that. And I will have all Sonia's details in the show notes as well. What excites you the most about behavioral science?
Using your brain. Like there's something that goes on in understanding the human brain for me and being my biggest experiment. And I think that's been that has excited me the most is these aha moments of when I think I've been making rational decisions. And then I go, oh my gosh, that was loss aversion in play, or that was a decoy effect, or that was social norms, or that's that, or I can see things in my own behavior. So it's like the unraveling of myself is the biggest, it's like change yourself, change the world sort of
I
thing.
don't know if that's good or bad.
It's great because you suddenly make your own unconscious conscious.
I can see how that plays out well. I don't know how I'd feel once I've been debunking myself though.
Well, what happens is you're an observer of yourself. It doesn't mean it keeps changing your behavior because we're only human. However, you do have these aha moments, and it's liberating and empowering, as just as it is in work. I think that to me has been the most exciting thing is understanding the nature of of my own brain.
Yep.
And then for me, the most exciting thing is to share it and take the mystery away from everyone and empower them.
Yeah, and applying it everywhere.
Mm.
I love that. I have my final question I ask everybody. What brand, any brand in the world, best represents you and why?
Brand Sonia.
As cheating, but that's fair. You have created it around yourself. So I'll give you that one.
Yeah, I have, it's like I have chosen a different way to do things, and I attract people who are magnetized by that for what they want to do as well, which is usually a different way. And I think the biggest thing for people is I give them a lot of clarity on another way of doing things and empower them in their world, not just business, but in their life, which, to me, I have helped in the smaller, startup world. I've helped save businesses, which usually means saving relationships. And that's different to the dynamic of what happens in big business. So to have done that in my career is a nice thing to have done.
I love that, and so true as well. Thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to do a quick wrap up of things I've learned today, so bear with me. So today we had Sonia and learned all about behavioral science and how to apply just a tiny piece of what she knows into our everyday world as well. For me, I was obsessed with knowing more about nudges. Nudges can be so powerful, and I'd seen so many different blog articles, posts, videos on nudges, particularly from Sonia, and I wanted to understand more about it and how it could be applied. So for me, one of the biggest pieces here is data is always king. We know that, but it's how you apply it to be able to help with those decision-making processes. So it's about thinking and using the data in the right way that is you understand either it's engaging or it's disengaging. There's going to be that clarity that comes with understanding the data. And dashboards that have data info may not actually come through with insights and value for you. And that's where, if you understand the brain, you understand more about the biases, how shortcuts work, the habits, and turning them into beliefs. All of those pieces all come together. For me, I found it very interesting to hear about how biases can then turn into a habit after maybe 8 times, and then after more times turn into a belief. And then how do you as a business owner change that if you're trying to change your business in a way internally, or you're trying to gain a new audience to use your products or services? And that's where understanding all this data and the behavior behind it makes a difference, because you understand friction points. Every human is different, and we have unconscious and conscious ways of doing things and hard triggers that come along with it. And by understanding this, we can then understand what's in our control and what is outside of our control to be able to make better business decisions, particularly when it comes to all these types of nudges. So for me, a lot of these pieces are about looking back and thinking, what have I done? Was it just me going to the shopping center, grabbing that milk? I didn't even think about it. It was just an automatic process. I'm just automatically doing it. And then stopping and realizing, no, I can actually look around and see there are 20 different types of milks. Am I making the right decision? Have I actually weighed it up? Am I lactose intolerant? Do I need skim milk? All these different thoughts are now coming to life for me in my head as I was listening to Sonia talking about triggers and how we're hard triggered and how we can apply that then to people coming to our websites. And this is the power of utilizing new technologies like AI to help you create different types of behavioral patterns and algorithms that can help you be able to give the right information forward for anyone visiting you. One of the examples we talked about was you may have a regular person that always comes and they're happy to pay full price. They just want to buy it, get out, buy it, get out. That's what they want. That's their habit. They don't care about coupons. But if you happen to serve them up a coupon message that breaks their usual journey, that could actually be a friction point that makes them leave and go somewhere else. So it's about understanding the data and the behavior so that you're actually serving up the right personalized offerings or journey to minimize the friction going through. Having a lot of data helps because you need that runway of data for the data points so then you can understand the intent. But again, it comes back to 3 questions. The 3 questions Sonia recommends us all asking. What is the behavior? What is the default behavior that people are doing? So what's naturally just occurring? And then how do we disrupt the default so it could hopefully be in our favor so that we're getting through to them and their behavior and changing that so then it becomes the habit and then the belief for us. Now, there's lots of ways you can look at doing this internally. You could outsource, you could get internal people in, you could even just get a specialist to come in for short term, or you can get Sonia and her team in to be able to do it for you. There's definitely different ways to be able to utilize behavioral science and how it can really benefit your business. But remember, the brain ultimately will try and do the path of least effort. It wants to do things quickly so it can move on to its next task because there's so much information coming into our brains at any point in time. But we need to make sure we start with data, understand the problems we're trying to solve. And most importantly, if you have time, read a book by, I believe it's Dan Ariely.
Dan Ariely. Yeah.
Ariely. Predictability Irrational. So definitely grab a copy of that. I'll put that one in the show notes as well for everyone. But nudges are so powerful. Understanding friction points and then applying nudges. You can do things fast, iteratively, and also see real results that you can measure and go back to your company and say, look at what we've saved. Look at what we've changed. Look at how we've pivoted from here to here. The money we've saved by not doing X, Y, Z, but by doing ABC instead. Nudges can be so powerful. Have I missed anything, Sonia, that you'd love to add?
No?
Fantastic. So thank you again, Sonia, so much for today. I've gotten so much out of this and I know my audience will have as well. And everyone else, make sure to connect to Sonia on LinkedIn. Check her business out as well. I'll put everything in the show notes. If your business needs help in this space, reach out to Sonia. She'll be able to help you all about nudges. And she also has Nudge It Yourself. And I'll include that into the show notes as well.
Brilliant.
Everyone, don't forget to like and follow More to Marketing to hear more fabulous guests in the future. More to Marketing.